Okay, welcome to the SAP UI5 walkthrough tutorial. For the step 3, we are looking at controls. In the previous step, we bootstrapped SAP UI5 and then displayed a simple browser alert saying UI5 is ready. Okay, and then we also had a plain HTML div that shows a hello world. So this is what we did in the previous section. So now we'll begin using real SAP controls. So this is where we begin to use SAP controls instead of just plain HTML, and this is where UI5 starts to feel like a real application development framework. And so what you learn in this step is that you're going to know what is a UI5 control, and you are going to learn how to create a control using JavaScript. You will also learn how to place a control inside the page, and you're also going to learn why SAP UI5 controls replace normal HTML tags. Also, you're going to look at what control libraries are. For example, look at SAP.m libraries, and then you're going to look at what's .placeAt, what is the function of .placeAt, and in this step also I will explain why we need to use the class SAP UI body, which is required. Okay, so now let's go into the code. So the first thing we need to do in this step is that we need to update the index.html file. So I head over to Cursor AI. So to update, I'm going to remove this hello div here. So why we need to remove this is because from now on we will no longer use just raw HTML elements to display text. So instead we display everything through UI control object. And the reason why we are going to use UI control object is because this gives us consistent styling. It also gives us responsive layouts and also UI5 theming. So when we use UI5 control objects, we have access to UI5 themes, and then we have a consistent styling. All right. So another thing that we are going to look at is that we are going to use a class called SAP UI body. So and that class goes into the body tag of our HTML. So we are going to say class. I'm going to explain what this means. Class equals SAP UI body, and then it has an ID called content. So now let's explain this. So this is what the SAP UI body class, what it does. It injects the following. That is, it gives the default UI5 background to our application, and then it also injects the font settings, theme colors, SAP Fiori look. So when we use this, our application will not be different from the regular or the standard Fiori apps that we know, and also it's going to follow spacing rules. So without it, the UI will look broken or unstyled. So, and like I explained, we have the ID. So if we go to the code, we see right here that we use the class SAP UI body, and then with the ID content. All right. So the next thing we need to do now is to create the text control inside index.js. So let's go to our index.js. I already explained part of this from previous step. We are going to understand what is the UI5 module structure. And so inside the first argument, we load dependencies. So let me remove this one more time. And so the first dependency that we are going to load is the SAP/m/text. Should be inside this square bracket. Okay, so what does this mean? SAP/m/text. And this means we are using the text control from SAP.m library, and UI5 will load this module before executing our code. So SAP/m/text is a control in UI5. It's a visual element with properties, with behavior, and it is managed by the UI5 rendering engine. So the SAP.m library includes controls like button. So if you want to use a button, then you need to use this library. If you want to show control for text, for page, for app, for lists, for an input, even for toolbar and for dialog, etc. So everything you see in the UI5 applications comes from a control library. Okay. Now, the next thing we're going to look at is how do we create this control? We want to create the control text. So this is the syntax. What we need is we need to create a text control using the keyword new text, and then we pass a configuration object and set the property of that configuration object to the text of our choice. So in this case, hello world. So let's see that in action. So we define the text control using the keyword new text. Then you have your brackets, and inside this bracket we have the curly bracket. So inside this curly bracket is where we pass the configuration object and then set the property to the text of choice. So the configuration object is text, and then what is the text I want to display? Let's say hello world, or hello SAP UI5, hello SAP UI5. All right. Then we need to pass this property here in our function text. So this new text is also part of our function. So remove that curly brackets and add it right here. So remember, we always use strict. So we need to add that keyword, use strict, and then semicolon. Okay, so one thing we should also know is that every UI5 control has things like properties, has events, has aggregations, and has associations. So the properties will carry things like text, width, and visible, events such as press, change, and select, aggregations such as children controls, and then the associations such as relationships. Now, the next thing that we need to do now is to use the dots place at, and this is where we now want to place the control in the DOM, document object model rather. Okay, so this is one of the most important lines. So what we do is we use dot place at, and then we use the ID that we defined in our HTML. So we say dot place at and then semicolon. So what was the ID we used? The ID is called content. All right, so let's save this, Ctrl S. Okay, so what this does is UI5 will now place the control that we just created, the text control we created, into the body of our page. Remember, if you go to index.html file, the index.html file has no div to show text on the screen, but because we created a control in our index.js and then use the .place at typo here, .place at, and then reference the ID of our page. So the result is that the HTML body becomes the container for the UI5 user interface, and the text control will now be rendered. All right, so let's save everything. Let's save, you use file and then save all. And I'm going to end the server, Ctrl C, and then run the server again, npm start. If you don't understand this, please look at the first video. So npm start it will automatically open the index.html file. So now we see the hello SAP UI5 displayed on the screen. All right, so why do we need to use .place at content? So what's the reason why we use this? The reason is we use it for demo applications, okay? And then we also use it for simple pages, and we also use it for walkthrough tutorials like this. So in real application, we do not use the .place at function. In real application, we do not use .place at. Instead, we use things like a root view, a component.js, we use routing, and we also use automatic rendering. Remember, we removed the hello world from the index.html file, and then we created the text control and then used the .place at function to render the text that would display hello SAP UI5 from our index.html page. Right? The reason why we remove HTML element is because UI5 controls It manages the whole life cycle. It manages rendering. It manages re-rendering. It also manages accessibility, theming, and then data binding. So UI5 is designed so that your UI is made up of UI controls, not just raw HTML types. And finally, important note about controls is that UI5 has two major object types, that is the sap.ui.core.element and the sap.ui.core.control. Okay, so the difference is that for the core.element, it is not independently renderable, so they are used inside other controls. For example, if you want to make a column inside a column or item inside a list. But for the sap.ui.core.control, these are renderable UI components. What does it mean to be a renderable UI component? So when we say render just means the process of taking code instruction, for example, JavaScript or HTML template, and then converting it into visual elements that a user will see in a web browser. So this is what we mean by render. Okay, so when you write your HTML, it converts it to visuals for the user. So the .control, they are renderable UI components, and then it has a .placeArt function, and it can be displayed on its own. Example like text, buttons, and input. So these are the .core object types that we have in UI5. So if you have gotten or if you have watched so far, what did we achieve in this step? At the end of step 3, we have fully loaded SAP UI5. We have used our first real SAP UI5 control, and then we rendered content using UI5, not HTML. And then we learned about UI5 modules and libraries. And finally, we used .placeArt to attach our UI to the page. Alright, so if you are new to this channel, please consider subscribing to encourage me to make more of these videos. And the next video, we are going to be looking at XML views. See you in the next video.